All right, so let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. A total domestic box office was about just shy of 93 million. So this does constitute about a 37% drop, right? Which again makes sense because there's not a lot of stuff coming out, and the big movie of last weekend, still number one, we'll talk about that in a second, but did drop, right? It did have a fairly large drop, nothing catastrophic, but obviously, a little bit more than you would maybe want, right? But just looking at the stuff opening this weekend, so we actually have a lot of small stuff opening, and again, because that it's kind of a wide open field for the box office for this month, they're able to kind of squeak in. So it's not number one, but the highest grossing new film of the weekend at number 2 is Speak No Evil, which I guess is an American remake, or maybe British, but an English language remake of a foreign language film, I think Danish perhaps, only bringing in about 11.5 million, and this was projected to make around 15 to 18, so it couldn't even meet those smaller projections, right? But it's not completely awful. If the one good thing about this movie finally coming out is I never have to see that awful trailer again, because it always makes me so uncomfortable every time I'm in the theater and I see this trailer. This brings its worldwide total to just under 21 million off of a $15 million budget. So it's crossed that initial threshold, but really we would want to see it get up to at least 30 to be profitable. Again, I don't think this hasn't been getting great reviews, but also it hasn't been getting catastrophically bad either. So if nothing else is really drawing audiences in, maybe this is able to end up being a tiny little moneymaker. But as it stands right now, not the best opening, right? Another film opening below projections, but still opening in the top 5, no less, is the Matt Walsh documentary, Am I Racist? So Matt Walsh, if you don't know who Matt Walsh is like a conservative media pundit. He's on Daily Wire. He's done a bunch of these like conservative kind of bad faith documentaries about like different hot button issues, right? So famously, he did the one, What is a Woman? With its title suggesting this idea that trans women are not women, and presumably Am I Racist is exploring am I really racist? So I don't really know that much about it, but just looking at the numbers here, didn't do super well, right? So it was projected, according to boxofficetheory.com, it was projected to make anywhere from about 7 to 11 million, and it couldn't even get to there, right? It made just a little under 5 million, but still made it into the top 5, right? So it's at number 4 here. And this constitutes its both domestic and worldwide total. And it was only made for $3 million, right? So again, it's crossed that initial threshold. It's over that the complete far right column here in that yellow zone, right? So I could see this, unfortunately, because I'm cynical, I could see this playing well over time, especially as we move into this election season when we have a black woman running for president. I could definitely see this being something that has legs. Even if it doesn't make a bunch of money based off of its budget, it could be like a little money maker. Also opening this weekend was The Killer's Game, coming in at number 6. It was projected to make 3 to 6 million, and it fell just shy of that, so not super off, but still fell below nonetheless, around 2.6 million. Again, I don't even really know anything about this movie. It's like a Dave Bautista action thriller. When I saw the little thumbnail for it, I was like, this is a direct-to-streaming or direct-to-VOD movie. Nope, it's in theaters. So, it's in it, and unfortunately, if you look all the way over to the right, it was made for like $30 million. So I'm not super hopeful that this is going to make back its budget. So I'm going to affirmatively say this is a bomb. Big bomb. And also opening, kind of in line with like what we were talking about with Matt Walsh's documentary, Am I Racist? We have at number 10, just squeaking in, the next installment in the beloved franchise, God's Not Dead, In God We Trust. So if you don't know what this, God's Not Dead is like a series of Christian films that, what I like to call like Christian, propaganda is maybe too harsh of a word. I call them Christian affirming films, where they're less about wrestling with one's faith and more so making the viewer feel good about being a Christian. And the whole God's Not Dead series is all about the initial film. I have seen the first film. None of the sequels. it's about this college student who goes to like a college philosophy class, and the professor is like this awful atheist who he says God is dead, blah 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 blah, and the whole movie is about the student convincing the teacher that God does exist, right? And it's at best really superficial, and at worst like offensive to both non-believers and Christians. So, I am not part of this world. I am very religious, but I am more on like the left-leaning side of things. Again, kind of like Am I Racist? It had projections. It was projected to make around 4 to 9 million. Fell way below that, or about 1.5 million for the weekend. So there's a little bit of Schadenfreude on my part. But again, the fact that something like Am I Racist and God's Not Dead, which even if there are people who believe those things politically or religiously, usually those films don't make it into the mainstream box office, right? But because of kind of the wasteland we have here, it speaks to those films being able to kind of squeak in here. Let's see here. Continuing second weekend, like I mentioned before, Beetlejuice, holding its first place spot in its second weekend, had about a 54% drop. So again, not awful, but if you are Warner Brothers, you would maybe want to see something a little bit better. But at this point, that's kind of standard for modern Hollywood. I feel like the new standard is as long as it's not like in the 60s or God forbid, the 70s. In terms of a percent drop, you're fine. Had the best per theater average of the weekend at over $11,000 per theater. This brings its its domestic total to about 188 million. So it still has a long way to go to have quote unquote the legs, right? If you see that domestic multiple column, this is essentially figuring out, how much of the opening constitutes the total domestic return, or rather the total gross for that film. So obviously it's only the second weekend. But ideally you want to see over time the domestic total expand to the point where the opening is actually just a small portion of it. It also brings its worldwide total to about 264 million. Again, off of just $100 million budget. So in its second weekend now, it has crossed that second threshold of mine. You got double the budget. It has crossed $200 million. So this has been fairly successful. Again, it's only in its second weekend. And I think considering that Beetlejuice is not a particularly strong brand, in my opinion. I'm sure the people at Warner Brothers and Tim Burton and the whole cast and crew are pretty happy about the results here. Let's see. Also in the top 5, we still have Deadpool and Wolverine. It dropped to second place last weekend. Now it's making its slow descent out of the top 10. So it's now dropped from second to third place in its 8th frame, though, right? So this has been out for 2 months. Deadpool and Wolverine making about 5.2 million for the weekend, only a 26% drop, so it's actually kind of holding okay. Even though it lost about over 300 theaters, this brings its domestic total to about 621 million, and it's had some good legs here. You see that domestic multiple of just under 3. So again, not incredible, but you're seeing that, and I'm more than happy to admit when I was wrong. I felt like this movie was very much like junk food's maybe the wrong word, but you see it, and then you're kind of done with it. You don't really need to go revisit it. But it's had some pull here. And I believe it's the second highest grossing film of the year, and worldwide at now 1.3 billion. Again, just off of a $200 million budget. So not as successful as something like we've seen earlier in the summer with like Inside Out 2 and Despicable Me 4, even though Despicable Me 4 has made less than Deadpool 3. It was made for less. So its rate of return, its percent return was much stronger, right? So yeah, you've made over $1 billion, but you also spent $200 million to making it, not to mention marketing and advertising, right? But again, what lessons are we going to take from Deadpool and Wolverine being successful? If Hollywood is consistent, it will be all the wrong lessons. We also have, again, another conservative film in the top 5, in the top 10. Reagan, the biopic, starring, what's his name, Jack Quaid, as the titular Reagan, dropping from 3rd to 5th in its 3rd frame. But again, only about a 40-ish% drop. What was it, 38, 39%? And this brings its domestic total to about 23 and almost 23.5 million. So it's had very good legs. Most of its money has been made after that opening, that fairly modest opening of, what is that, like 7.7%? 7.7 million. Its worldwide total is a little bit higher than its domestic, but like by like 9,000. So maybe just open in some random territories. But again, made for $25 million. So it still has yet to even cross that initial threshold. But like I've said in the past, this is a movie I feel like, again, destined for streaming and digital rental. So I feel like any money it makes is like just a bonus, and it's going to make its money back with people like my dad or something watching this on, renting it or watching it on Netflix or wherever it ends up. Also here, continuing in its fifth weekend, we have Alien Romulus dropping from 4th to 7th place, bringing just 2.4 million, about a 38.9% drop, lost about 600 theaters, but it's been doing pretty good, right? So its domestic total is about 101 million. So it's been having some decent legs, and its worldwide total is almost up to 331 million, off of just an $80 million budget, right? So despite not making anywhere near what Deadpool and Wolverine has made in terms of just sheer dollars, it has a pretty decent return at over 300%. So, the question will be, which I said last week, the question will be, is this enough of a success that Disney and 20th Century Studios will decide to make some other direct sequel to this, or continue the franchise in some way? It remains to be seen. And then we also have It Ends With Us, of course, the controversial film based off the controversial book. Talk about a juggernaut and a percent return and a lesson in having lower budgets, right? So it dropped from 5th to 8th place in its 6th frame, just a little bit over $2 million. But again, look at these totals, right? So 145 million domestically, 325 million worldwide, off of just a $25 million budget. This thing is so successful. I wish I had been able to invest in this with my $3 that I have. And again, there's a lot of behind the scenes drama between Blake Lively and her co-star and director Justin Baldoni. And so there's doubt if they're going to make a sequel to this. There is a sequel novel. Again, after the, I feel like I've said this 3 weeks in a row, but it just bears repeating, especially if you're joining us for the first time. They would be idiots not to do this. Just as a purely cynical businessman move, I would say you got to make a sequel to this. This is just, even if it's not as successful, there's no way it's going to be a flop after something like this, right? As long as you market it right? But notably though, this weekend it did have the smallest per theater average, only like under $1,000 per theater. But again, it's been out for 6 weekends. It's had pretty strong legs. At this point, it's just all about every little bit that it can that can be squeezed out of the film. Viviana put in the live chat here. Again, if you're watching this live, please put some comments if you have anything, any comments or thoughts or questions you want to share. Viviana writes, Matt Walsh's Am I Racist mockumentary disses DEI Am I Racist. Am I Racist shows him undergoing DEI training. Walsh says experience led to wild and demented places. Yeah, so again, it's like a very unserious exploration and not even like a funny one. Like it just feels, again, it just feels like the comedy is coming from like, aren't people who complain about racism so silly? Like, I don't really get what the joke is, other than just like, these people you don't like are dumb. I don't really understand. And I mean, and I feel like it's the same issue on the other side. Like, I wouldn't necessarily enjoy watching a documentary of Trump supporters being idiots or something. Like it's like, I know that, but I don't need to watch that. Like, I don't really get a lot of pleasure from that. So it's interesting to see a film like that not only in the top 5, again, not only in the top 10, in the top 5, right? At number 4, despite falling below those projections, speaks to, again, kind of the wasteland of September. But again, once we start really moving into like October, I'm trying to think of like what other big things are coming out. I don't think we're really getting anything super, super big until at least October. And then, of course, it's going to be award season, right? So we're going to have a lot of films coming out, having really small, limited runs, and then they will get wide releases sometime in January or February, or March, right? Even after the Oscars, right? Because that's a big part of a lot of studios' strategy. So just looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, we have Transformers 1, spelled out O-N-E. This is projected to make about 40 to 50 million for the weekend. It's kind of like a I've heard people compare it, kind of categorize it as like X-Men First Class, but for Transformers, where it's kind of like you have Optimus Prime and Megatron and all the other Autobots like when they're younger, and it's kind of like their origin story, and they're all kind of working together, and then presumably we're going to see those fissures be created. Never been super into Transformers. The trailer looks awful, but it's been getting good reviews, so I'm kind of like, okay, maybe it just wasn't cut well, but you know, it is projected again, but not a huge opening though. Again, we've seen movies this past year that I did not think would open big and have opened quite large. So I'm surprised that this isn't more. But you know, but I would love to take a look at the numbers for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the film that was it Mutant Mayhem from last year. Despite getting really good reviews, that also I believe that didn't do super well at the box office. So maybe this is kind of a similar situation. And then we have film Never Let Go, a kind of horror thriller with Halle Berry. About like, I don't even know what it's about. Post-apocalyptic. They have to like, they live in this little house, and then if they want to go out, they tie themselves to a rope as if like they're like at sea or something. I don't know, but not expected to open very, very big. Only about 49 million are my projections. Again, this is something that kind of feels like a streaming movie that I think they're just trying their hand because the industry has decided, shit, maybe we were wrong. Maybe streaming is not the way we need to go here in order to make lots of cash.